Hi everyone, Claudia here. This time I have a walkthrough for you. I hesitate to call it a tutorial, but that's just me having not enough confidence to do so. But I do believe you might be able to take something away from this video. So, to get a bit more practice with my new gouache paints and to get a better feel for the medium, I decided to do a couple of value studies. I got inspired to do my own gouache value studies, as one usually does, after watching a YouTube video that got suggested to me by the algorithm. If I can find it again, I'll link it in the description for you because there's some valuable information to be found in it. Her, that is, the artist in the video, approach was slightly different than mine because she spent some time adding shading to her pencil sketch. I think I made a feeble attempt myself, but immediately got too lazy to actually execute that extra step. And that's what it is, an extra step. If you think you might need to lay down some of the values in your pencil step, absolutely do so. The shading will probably show through the gouache here and there, creating an interesting effect and extra texture. Lazy people like me can simply skip that step and jump directly into the painting process. And to be honest, I could have done with an even less defined sketch than the one I had. But the sketch is not the most important part. It can be important if you use it as an underdrawing, like I just mentioned, but the really adventurous people among you could jump right in with just the paints alone and no sketch at all. And in all honesty, I have done that with some of my digital paintings. It's as if my brain just works differently whenever I paint digitally. And I guess it's a mixture of the different feel with a tablet compared to pen and paper and less fear of making mistakes for me. In my first study, I used black and white gouache paint. If I were to do this with watercolors or ink, I'd just use the black and thin it down to my desired strength, and you can do that with gouache as well. But I didn't just do a value study, I also wanted to get familiar with a medium that can be used in thicker opaque layers. Let's take a look at my reference photo first and do some analyzing. The main light source is above the head and almost completely to its left. To the right, some of that light gets reflected by what I assume is a wall, brightening the right side of the face as well as the nose, lips, and part of the eye and socket. The values range from a light grey on the left side of the forehead, the left cheek, and the top of the hair to almost black in the eye sockets, the mouth, under the chin, around the ears, and in several other places. So it's not going all the way from white to black, but the reference still covers a very wide range of values. And to be completely honest, I didn't expect I could achieve those dark values in my studies, but the important thing is to end up with a good approximation and create a balanced painting that reads well, that is, the shapes are easily distinguishable. I went with Greek statue heads for my references because they are practically already black and white. Well, technically they're Roman replicas of originally Greek bronze statues, but they're Greek in style. You get what I mean. It's just that more of these stone replicas survived because it was way too tempting to melt down the bronze and reuse it for something else. But what I wanted to say here is that I simply skipped the extra step of having to desaturate my reference images by choosing marble heads as my references. There's another bonus of using statue heads, and that is that they, in my experience, are often lit in a way that is very useful and educational for artists. If you've ever checked out other artists' tutorials on how to render the head or the face, you've probably heard that advice already. Go for references with a clear, preferably single light source, maybe two if you feel more confident, where light and shadows are well defined. Try to stay away from fashion photography, not just because there's usually heavy skin editing involved, but because they generally don't have good contrast. They pretty much always use several light sources to get rid of deep shadows, and what's left is a fairly flat-looking face. It works well for advertising, but not for learning. You don't have to use heads or faces for your value studies, of course. As long as your reference has a good range of, well, values, you're good to go. If you have trouble seeing the correct values in your reference, or maybe there are a lot of tiny nuances that just overwhelm you, you could try to open your reference image in a photo editing or painting program and test a couple of filters to find one that can group together values that are close to each other. In a pinch, a blur filter will do to see the bigger picture. You will have to switch between the original and the filtered picture. And, of course, just squinting always works. I worked more or less from light to dark, starting with the palest value and going darker step by step. If you manage to lay down nice, even layers and don't blend the edges, you can achieve a nice cel shading effect, similar to what you see in traditional animation. Although I personally would probably use acrylics for this because they don't reactivate once they're dried down, making it easier to get even color. Working light to dark works well for me, but I know how easy it is to end up with a painting that is overall too light. If you want to be adventurous, lay down the darkest values first. That way you have a guideline and know where you need to go. And if that turns out to be a bad idea, just cover up your mistakes with more paint. Another thing you could do is mix up several shades of grey, or even the full range of values beforehand, instead of making them up on the go as I did. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but in person there was a difference between the greys I mixed up with the black and white and the greys I got by just watering down the black. Black and white pigments are almost never perfectly black and white, nor perfectly neutral in tone. When I add water to my black, I can see a touch of brown making it slightly warm, while the white looks cool next to the pale beige of my paper. The black and white mixed together create slightly blue-leaning greys. When it came to the background, I deliberately used just the black mixed with water for an extra bit of warm-cool contrast. I added the background about halfway through the painting so that I could see the values I already put down in better relation. Once again, it doesn't really matter when you do things like that, because everyone has a different workflow and a different way of seeing and visualizing things. Do what you think makes you progress in your painting process, and don't hesitate to do things that feel out of order. You're stuck? Add the background, go for the darker values, take a break, take a step back so that you don't lose yourself in the details, and so on. Observe your reference image to figure out which parts are necessary and figure out where you can simplify shapes and merge values. For example, at some point I finally noticed that the nose was sitting way too low and just fixed it by covering my mistake up with paint. And also, speaking of details, try not to get too caught up with them. If you think that I am not listening to my own advice, you might be right. I have this terrible habit of fussing around with the tiniest details that just slow down my process tremendously, and in the end, I don't even know if it makes my paintings any better. But what I tell you here are just recommendations and tips to try, not any set rules that, if you don't follow them, will result in a failed artwork. It's just hard to break old habits. My second study had a very similar process than the first, except that I added color into it. The reference was lit in blue and I couldn't help myself and had to replicate that. But let's take a closer look at this reference image as well. Here, the light comes from the top right, but it's also a bit shifted to the front so that more parts of the face is highlighted compared to the other reference photo. Some of the light gets bounced back somewhere on the left side, which you can easily see on the neck, where the two shadows overlap and form almost a triangle under the chin. I like that line of reflected light along the jawline that's probably from the bright chest area. Here the values range from almost white, for example on the hair, above the right brow bone, and along the nose, to very deep, but not black, in the eye sockets, under the nose, between the lips and under the chin. It appears to be less contrasted than the other reference image, even though it goes almost as dark as the other one. But that's because the really dark areas are smaller and there are more of the lighter areas. As I said, my process for this painting was basically the same as with the other one. I started with the lightest values first and went progressively darker. This time I added the background a bit later, when I had some of the darker shadows already in place, and I used the same approach as with the other one, just with the blue instead of the black. I think the difference between the just thinned down blue and the blue that has white and black mixed in is more noticeable than with just the black. The pure paint is much more vibrant, and the mixed paint is a bit desaturated because of the white and black, which is to be expected. After that, it was just adjusting some areas and finessing the details. I will leave you now with some music and the painting process of this second piece, but with fewer cuts and even more sped up than the last one, because I already managed to streamline my workflow the second time around. And I also don't want to strain your attention span too much with a video that never ends. If you enjoyed this video, maybe consider doing the like, comment, subscribe YouTube thing. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye.